Welcome to Healed to Heal, the podcast that champions radical faith, confronts unbelief, and amplifies a single truth. Jesus still heals. He always has. He never stopped. So whether you're still lying on the mat or carrying someone else to Jesus, this is for you. Hi, friends. Welcome back to the Healed to Heal podcast. That's our mission. That's our prayer. And that's why conversations like the one we're going to have today matter so much. Before we dive in, I want to offer a quick listener note. Today's episode includes mention of some sensitive topics like trauma, sexual abuse, and involvement in the adult entertainment industry. If you have any kind of problem with that, or if you have little ears nearby, just be aware of that and use discretion. But we hope you can stay because this is going to be a powerful episode. The conversation is never about shame or about exalting what has gone wrong. It's always about freedom and seeing that God can use anything. He can restore anything, anytime, anywhere. You're going to see that in such an extraordinary way today. So I'm so honored to introduce Tiffany Brearton. Tiffany is the founder of She Was Made for More Ministry. She's also the author of From Stilettos to Grace and From a Mess to His Message, a 21-day healing study for women walking through trauma and restoration. Her testimony, guys, it's raw, it's honest, it's powerful, and it is truly a beautiful picture of someone who is healed to heal. So, Tiffany, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. What a beautiful introduction. I want to add that I'm co-founder of that ministry.
Oh, okay, sorry.
No worries, no worries.
Very good to know. Well,
Thank you so much for having me.
before we get into some of the things that you've been through, can you give us sort of just kind of your origin story, maybe a little bit about your background? What was happening in your life that led you down the path that you ended up in?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So, really was born in a home with two parents. My parents actually stayed together. They're still together, actually, believe it or not. Was born and raised Catholic, 12 years of Catholic school, and really just came from, a standard, normal, middle class home, which is important because I think we think that only bad things happen to people who, have had a rough life or
Yeah.
things like that. So I think it's important to say that. But I have an older sister and a younger brother, so I was right square in the middle and had middle child syndrome bad too, might I
Yeah.
add. And so, yeah, that was just a little bit of growing up, what was happening. And my dad actually was like just a strong, spirit as far as he should have been in the military, but he wasn't kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so we had a cousin who was in and out of juvenile and just reached out to see if we could help with kind of restore this young man's life. And so he opened his home and did and tried to help my cousin and bring him back to, a solid foundation. And unfortunately, that cousin was the one who ended up sexually abusing me at a young age. So life kind of just started spiraling
Yeah.
from that moment on.
Well, what are the things that kind of shaped your identity after experiencing something like that? I mean, you ended up kind of seeking validation. Is that how you would kind of say it? Like, what was it? Not so much validation, but how did you overcome that?
I mean, it took years. There was no quick fix. Honestly, I didn't tell a soul until I was 18. So I was carrying the shame and darkness on my own. Was terrified. I had never experienced anything like this, and the cousin who was living at her house, not for long thankfully, but he began to like kind of stalk me, and I was scared to even say anything at all. So I was spiraling out of control as a young girl, leaving suicide notes all over the place, cutting up my arm, bulimic, anorexic, all the things, crying out for help. And really, I didn't know what I needed help from.
Yeah. But maybe just a cry to be seen and to feel loved and to, let people know that you were there.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess even more so, just like, letting them know I'm dying on the inside and just to cry for help.
Yeah. So is that what led to the decision to be involved in the adult entertainment industry?
Absolutely. Of course, I didn't have that language or know that at the time, but recently the Lord's really been shining a light on Tiffany. The moment you were sexually abused was the moment the enemy start rewriting your story and started trafficking you.
Yeah.
Because number one, it doesn't matter if I have good character or not. No one grows up and wants to become a stripper, wants to be trafficked, wants to be a prostitute. That's not your dream. That's no one's dream. And so I walked into the strip club as my first adult job at the age of 18, and I was actually a virgin at the time,
Yeah. Wow.
which obviously doesn't line up with, my character and who I was. But yes, looking back now, I know for a fact that's the reason I made that decision.
Well, I remember hearing a little bit about the man that was part of that process that you became close with, and he was really kind of drawing you into a relationship with him that wasn't exactly healthy. Can you walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, so I walked past the lap dance area my first visit to the strip club, and I naively said to the manager, "Hey, am I going to have to do that?" Because I had never seen anything like that in my life. Again, a virgin. And so he chuckled and said yes. And so I was scared, as you can imagine, out of my mind. And what I did was what I thought was a wise move and started looking for protection within the club. There was a gentleman there who overlooked the lap dance area, and I just made him my friend. I needed to be safe, and that's his job, to keep me safe and to make sure I wasn't getting touched. So as I was looking for safety, he was 34 and I was 18. He had other motives. And so what I thought was a friendship ended up turning into much more and ultimately led to me in a relationship with him, and scared to stop the relationship because I would lose my safety and then losing my virginity to rape for the first time.
I can't even believe that. I can't even understand it. Nobody, I'm sure, who hasn't undergone something like that can even understand what that's like. But isn't it true that you ultimately married this man? This is
Yeah.
your first husband.
Yeah, I mean, I was a really good girl and had strong convictions. I always said the first person I had sex with, I was going to marry. And so much so that I had a lot of boyfriends my senior year in high school. And I told them, if you even mention sex, you're out of here. And so I had 12 boyfriends. As soon as they said it, I was out of there. So I was very convicted on that. And it was like I gave him, well, not it wasn't my fault, but what I told him was part of the key to me letting go and putting down some boundaries that I hadn't before. So I told him that the first person I had sex with was going to be the person that I knew loved me and that was going to marry me. And so it could have been that night, it could have been a couple of days, but very shortly after, he gave me those magical words back that I had been looking for and said, "Tiffany, I love you and I know you're the person I'm going to spend the rest of my life with, and I'm going to marry you." And so I found myself in positions I wouldn't have before. I let down guards and walls, ended up in, his apartment by myself in these places that I wouldn't have before. And that is what, well, not how the rape happened. He was the reason the rape happened, but I was in vulnerable circumstances that I wouldn't have been in before.
Yeah. Well, you ultimately ended up moving away from that as an unhealthy relationship, and you ended up having your daughter, right? So, where
Yeah.
can you tell us a little bit about how you went from that, where you were sort of drawn in with him, and then to realizing that you needed to be out of that?
Yeah, and I'm sorry I didn't answer all of your first question, but I'll get to it here. So he told me at the time that he was fixed because, and I believed it because in Catholic school, actually, they don't teach anything other than abstinence. They don't teach birth control and those things. So I just believed that was a thing, didn't know otherwise, and not probably, I don't know, a few months later he told me, "I'm actually I got it reversed and there's a possibility that you could end up pregnant." And in that moment, I knew, everything in me knew I was pregnant, and turns out I was. And so the reason I stayed with him after the first initial rape was because my mind started telling me the story I've been telling myself my whole life. The first person I have sex with, I'm going to marry. Ultimately, that was rape and that wasn't consensual. But to me, I justified all the things to make it right. So now I'm pregnant. I am with a guy, the first person I had sex with. So the next step was, to me, marriage. So ultimately stayed with him and gave that a shot.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Well, at some point, it must not have been good for you, or it must have felt like you needed something else. I mean,
Yeah.
was he abusive to you, like, on an ongoing basis, or was it just a combination of things?
Yeah, it was definitely mental. There was some physical sprinkled throughout. But ultimately, when my daughter came into existence and I started being a mom at the age of 19, something in me, and I didn't have a relationship with Jesus at the time, but something in me kind of woke up that this isn't about you anymore. This is about more than you. And so I found the strength to get out of that circumstance because I had to protect my little girl.
Yeah. That's amazing. Well, can you fast forward a little bit to the time where you knew you needed continued healing? Because there had to be a shift that happened there. I'm sure that God was working through all of those things to open up your heart in ways. What was the
100%.
healing process like?
100%. So all these things kind of took me to the end of me, right?
Yeah.
Ended up with a divorce, ended up broken relationship after broken relationship, married a man who was a good man, but he died of leukemia. It was just trauma after trauma. So 2 marriages down, and right before that, second husband got diagnosed with leukemia. I found the Lord. I start hearing that you can have a relationship with Jesus and he'll talk to you and he still can bring healing and all the things. And so, although my life was still very much spiraling and trauma was still very much happening, I had hope for the first time in my life because now, I have a savior and I for sure needed saving.
So what was that like? I mean, I think I remember hearing you talk about going to a conference or something. Like, was there one moment or more than one moment where you sort of had your eyes open?
Yeah, so I was going to conferences and I start hearing people speaking on stage about Jesus and how he said this and how he said that. And I was like, what? We didn't learn that in school that you could talk to Jesus and he would talk back. And so that was really the moment where seeds were planted and it unlocked those things in me. And then, I just had a crash course on dependency because the second husband died of leukemia. And I'm telling you, I thought my life was over. Here I am again, single mom. I've been in so many relationships, the dream and fairy tale of ever being married again, ever having a children again, I thought died that day. And so, but I did have one piece of hope finally, and that was the Lord. And so, many people in their 20s didn't have my story. So, a lot of friends, it was a lot for them to handle, and they kind of dropped off the map. And so, I was left with the Lord. And so, I had a crash course on dependency and really found him as a savior. And when he says he's close to the brokenhearted, I was able to experience that in a real, tangible way. And I really think it just was, like I said, a fast course to dependency on him because of the situation I was in.
That's wonderful. That's extraordinary. I remember also hearing you saying that when you got to a certain place, you were just desperate for healing. Do you think that that played into being able to receive it? Like you said, what was coming to the end of yourself like? Just realizing that you couldn't determine, you couldn't depend on these other things anymore. Or there had to be something higher.
Yeah. So 34, I was going to church again and had started hearing again about more characteristics of God, that he is doing miracles still today, that he is healing people. And I literally at that point was having anxiety attacks almost every day. Trauma had resurfaced, and years of trying to push it down were successful in the past, but they weren't successful anymore. And so I had nothing, no choice but to deal with it or be overtaken by it. And so when I heard another glimmer of hope that God's still doing miracles, and they were talking about this experience through church called Woman Camp, I signed up for that camp and decided to go camp outdoors and meet Jesus because they were like, I met Jesus at at this camp on this land and he healed me of this and he healed me of that. And I was like, okay, well, if he's going to do this in a day, let's go and get this taken care of
Right. Yeah.
because I'm desperate. I got to I mean, I had married again, had a beautiful husband, three more babies. I should have been happier than I ever been in my life, but the trauma was overtaking me.
Yeah. So
So
you went to this camp. Yeah.
yeah, I just started meeting Jesus in a real way through people. I was paired in a group with some of my best friends now. I didn't know at the time, but they were talking at this camp like, you have a limited time basically. You need to go deep and you need to go fast. So I was like, okay, I'm going to put every single skeleton out there. I'm going to tell church ladies that I used to be a stripper. And of course I was terrified, but I was that desperate for healing. So I told them everything, every skeleton, all the darkness. And they, for the first time in my life, just met me with love and grace. And I, I didn't walk away with my miracle from that camp, but what I walked away from was a taste of freedom because I was met with his grace for the first time. Like, oh my gosh, my story didn't scare them, and there was compassion for me. And so God gave me the verse, Luke 8:48. And it's about the woman with the blood issue, and she is my girl. But it just talks about chasing your healing. She had 12 years. She's chasing her healing from this blood issue, going to doctor after doctor and all the things, and nothing's working until she finally meets Jesus and touches the hem of his garment, and she's healed. And he turns around and he says in Luke 8:48, he says, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." And so he gave me that verse. And I'd heard from the Bible and people in church that God can't lie. And I was like, okay. So he says, I'm going to be well and I'm going to have peace. So I began the journey of the woman with the blood issue. I just chased him. I began to sign up for counseling, EMDR therapy, every childhood sexual trauma group at my church. Then I led the group and then I signed up for every prayer night so people could pray over me, went to deliverance, all of the things because I knew I wasn't well yet and he'd promised me, so that was going to happen. So I just chased him until finally he released my healing too. And then I finally had peace. So, but it wasn't overnight, it was years. It was
Yeah.
years.
Well, you couldn't possibly have known this, but one with the issue of blood is my girl too. And I experienced my own divine healing. And I'm actually working on a book called Touching Jesus about her. Like that, it follows that story. But what's so remarkable, Tiffany, and everything that you just said is I believe that when somebody makes that decision, I'm going with that. It's I believe, and then help thou my unbelief. I'm going to do this. I'm going after it. And when somebody does what you did, where they decide I'm going to touch Jesus for healing, he made that promise. To me, it's inevitable after that. It may take the unfolding, it may take years, like you said, but it's that decision that you made in my heart that meant you were going to receive that because you decided I'm going with Jesus.
Amen.
That's so, so remarkable.
Well, I'm going to show you my second book cover. I think it's going to blow your mind if you haven't seen it yet. But
From a
let's see.
mess to his
From a mess
message.
to his message.
Yeah.
See this woman? My first chapter is actually called The Woman with the Blood Issue. And I
Wow.
just released this in August. And it's a book study to really just invite Jesus into your sexual trauma because statistics say that 1 in 4 little girls have experienced sexual trauma, but by the time they're 18. And so obviously, I know that this book is needed and relevant in
Yes.
inviting God into your healing journey. But every person I have ever met has not had a reported case. And I'm actually surprised at this point when someone hasn't directly or indirectly been affected by sexual trauma. So I think the numbers in my head are closer to 1 and 2. So I know, and God had me write this book, the need for this study. And yes, all of these things in my journey, the EMDR therapy, the counseling, the everything was an important part of my journey and brought me freedom in many levels. But ultimately, he was my healer and he released my healing because in my own efforts. I did everything and I tried, but it was just chasing him until he released my healing. So, this is a way you can invite Jesus into the process of your own healing.
I love that. That's a beautiful story. And I think it takes a lot of courage to do what you do when you put yourself out there. I guess that leads to my next question because at some point after you received your healing, you knew that you had to help somebody else. So, what was it that you think gave you that courage? Was it because you saw the way that you were treated with the unconditional love at the group, or was it a combination of things? When did you know I'm going to have to write about this? I'm going to have to do something.
Yeah, it was a combination of things. God called me to write my first book, From Stilettos to Grace, my memoir, when I was actually in the hospital with that second husband who had leukemia. And obviously, it was just him planting a seed because it was not time to write the book, but he had started talking to me about that. And I think the big piece of when I got my voice back was honestly the deliverance piece of it because I'd done all the healing, all the things, met God in all the ways, but there was something left behind spiritually wise where I was oppressed and I couldn't, have my voice fully. Like I had so much freedom in so many levels, but it was like, you're trapped in a cycle and you're like, why sort of thing? Like, why?
Mhm.
And there was like that, it was the mind, body, and spirit that needed to be addressed. So that deliverance piece for me brought me out of a lot of oppression where when I released my first book, God told me I was going to be a voice to and for the voiceless. And so as I stepped into that, I'm really seeing that unfold more now than
Yeah.
obviously when he told me that because, I have recently found even that piece of my story is now one of human trafficking. And I had no clue that was a part of my story. And so being able to be a voice for people who are still stuck in that, who, need some hope in that is huge. And you're right. I mean, it's just weighty and powerful. So now it's just like I'm unlocked and unleashed to be able to do that because I know God didn't give me my voice back just for me.
Yeah, and that's like one of the taglines from my Heal to Heal book is your healing is never just for you. And I think you kind of touched on it. It's like the healing is ongoing because God will put people in your life that went through this something similar that you went through. And when you're able to impart some kind of wisdom or some kind of help, even on the tiniest level, that's healing that continues for you, not just for them, but your healing is ongoing. So what has that been like being able to share this with other people and seeing them improve or seeing lives change? What has that experience been like?
Well, it's huge. I mean, every time I share my story on sexual trauma, when I speak about it, one way or another, someone finds me afterwards and says, "Me too." And sometimes it's the first time they ever told someone. I'm talking 70-year-old women sometimes never told anyone about their sexual trauma. And I think that's why it's so important. It doesn't matter what your story is to share our stories because it opens up and creates a safe space for others to say, you know what? Me too. And I know from, again, the beginning of my healing journey at that woman camp, sitting around that campfire and bringing darkness to light, how powerful that can be. Just starting to say, hey, me too. Bringing that darkness to light, it starts your freedom journey because it invites him in. It lets darkness out and invites the light into this space that the enemy has had a hold on for years.
That it reminds me too of a scripture that talks about, that it to your point, everything that is illuminated becomes a light. Like until those things come out, God cannot heal them. God can heal our wounds, but if we, believe that lie. So those are the lies that we believe, the enemy schemes, right? That you can't tell anybody. What would you say to somebody that maybe is struggling through some of that? Like how would you speak directly to them if they're afraid to tell something that they've experienced?
Yeah, honestly, I just share my story and I find that that's all that's needed and creating a safe space because when I get into the role of counselor and thinking I know what's best for someone and instead of pointing them to Jesus, I find myself getting myself in trouble. I don't know about you or cuz we all think we know the magical answer, right? Like you can share things that have helped you and things like that along the way, but just being a safe space for that darkness to come to light. And It's wild how you can see their wheels turning when they are able to say things in a safe space and where you are reaching them with compassion and not judgment. Like, why did you make that choice to be a stripper? Blah, 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 blah. That is not the safe space. That is judgment. So just the judgment free area is really what unlocks it because it, like you said, it's that exchange. It invites the light into those dark spaces. And then I'm pointing them to Jesus, and I think that's why this book he's called me to write is a really good thing because I'm not coming off like I'm the counselor and I have your answers. Here's some things that's helped me along the way. Absolutely. But ultimately, you need to take your healing journey to Jesus for what your next step looks like. Cause he's such a personal God. Like, I don't know if you've heard, but part of my healing journey of healing from pleaser was coloring my hair bright pink and purple. And he used it for me because I was more afraid of people than I was, like, I had more fear of people than I did him. And so that's obviously not going to be a piece most of the time of their healing journey, but he's so personal. And so I'm just going to point you to him and say, ask him what your next step is. Ask him what fears are holding you back from taking that next step. And that's what I do in the book so they can sit with God and abide in him and see where they go next.
That's phenomenal. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the things that you're doing now? Like you are a speaker. Do you go to events? Like what are some of the things that you offer?
Yeah, so my ministry, She Was Made for More. We really go to churches here right now in the Jacksonville, Florida area, and we share our raw testimony. We find it extremely powerful and helpful, especially to people who go sit in church pews and they see women or powerful speakers up there, and that looks unattainable, right?
Yeah.
That seems like I can never reach that. But a girl like me, who's a hot, broken mess still, and with purple hair or whatever, that seems reachable. She has a real, raw story, and she's been through the fire, and God's still using her,
Yeah.
So that's one way we use our voice. My passion right now is bringing advocacy and awareness to human trafficking. So I'm originally from Kentucky, and I've started working in Kentucky with some local senators and things like that to launch some human trafficking awareness events. I'm on a planning board now for one that will be in April, and I'll be sharing that. I think that we have an opportunity as a church to be the lights in a very dark space and to bring revelation that it's not just happening overseas, that it's happening here. It's happening to your daughters, your sisters, your aunts, whoever. And we need to be the answer to that because what's going to make the darkness go away? That's the light. And we need to bring the light into some very dark spaces. So I really just share my story to hopefully mobilize the church and that they will be inspired that these girls can be restored. There is hope. They can be healed. God can use them too, not just looking at them like a lost puppy dog that is never able to be restored. So that's really my passion. And then, of course, sharing my books and whatever way. And I'm so thankful for platforms like yours and podcasts like yours that share these real hard stories so others feel seen and heard, you
Yeah,
know?
that's incredibly powerful. And when I saw your story, I was so impacted because heal to heal is exactly that. It is taking the thing that you've been redeemed from and then turning and administering that to somebody else in a way that's positive. And I loved your point, your humility to admit that, hey, I don't may not have all the answers, but here's what worked for me. And that is so much more powerful than any kind of like 5 steps to this, but just this is what works. This is how God has worked in my own life. The word tells us, let the redeemed of the Lord tell their story. And, we're told in Revelation, they overcame the enemy by the word of their testimony
Right.
and by the blood of the Lamb. So when you have the courage to speak about these things and do it with such a beautiful smile on your face and with such courage in your heart, you can't argue with that. Tiffany, nobody can argue with a life that's been transformed
Amen.
the way that yours has. And that just brings me chills thinking about it. So Just before we close, give us your website and just like maybe a blessing for the people that are listening.
Yeah, it's TiffanyBrearton.com, and you probably have to look at the show notes for the spelling of that. And I'm on all social media handles. You can find me there. Google my name. I do podcast often, and you can find both of my books, From Stilettos to Grace and From a Mess to His Message, on Amazon for purchase. And yeah, I just bless whoever is listening to have courage to take their next step, whatever that looks like, between you and God, towards your healing journey, because there is always so much more. God did not send his son Jesus to die on the cross so you take your sin and your shame to your grave. He paid it all for you, and he wants more for you. So I just encourage you to chase after him like the woman with the blood issue and find your more, because he is still setting the captives free. He did it for me, and I'm a whole hot mess, so I know he can do it for you. He's not, a God of favorites. You are his favorite. I'm his favorite. We're all his favorite, and he is capable of so much more, and nothing's too much for him. You're never too far gone. Never.
Wow, that's powerful. That's so powerful. I can't do any better than that. You heard it. Tiffany Brearton, thank you so much for taking the time with us today. And as for everybody else that's listening, remember that this is where you come to receive your healing and then carry that healing to the world. Heal to heal. God bless.